Hi, my name is Dawn Scott, and I'm here today to present more about gifted learners using the MTSS process. The title of our presentation today is Accessibility of Supports for Gifted Learners Using the MTSS Process. I am very proud to present with Dr. Lesley Hellman, Mrs. Kari Hake, and Mrs. Katherine Weaver. Here is what we plan to cover today. On the agenda, we will start and ask a series of opening questions to get you thinking about what it means to be a gifted learner and what is the MTSS process. Then we will cover the definition of gifted learners, provide an overview of the MTSS process, and give you some time to actually study some case scenarios and develop an MTSS plan for those students. Finally, we will close with final thoughts. Here are two questions we would like you to think about to get you started for today. The first is, what does it mean to be a gifted learner? And the second question is, what is MTSS and how can the system be used to serve the needs of gifted learners? Please spend the next few minutes thinking about those questions and jotting down some ideas. Now that we've asked you to think about what is a gifted learner, we would like to provide a couple of definitions. In our federal system, each state has the authority to define gifted learners, but we would like to provide a pretty common national definition from the NAGC and then our more specific Ohio definition. The National Association for Gifted Children defines gifted learners as students with gifts and talents to perform, or who have the capability to perform at higher levels compared to others of the same age, experience, and environment in one or more domains. These students require modifications to their educational experiences to learn and realize their potential. Students with gifts and talents come from all racial, ethnic, and cultural populations as well as all economic strata. They require sufficient access to appropriate learning opportunities to realize their potential. They can also have learning and processing disorders that require specialized intervention and accommodation, hence the need for the MTSS process. And gifted learners need support and guidance to develop socially and emotionally as well in their areas of talent. We will also address this concern in our MTSS process. In our state of Ohio, the definition for gifted learners is the following. Students who are gifted are ones who perform or show potential for performing at remarkably high levels of accomplishment when compared to others of their own age, experience, or environment. Public school districts are required to identify students in grades K through 12 for gifted identification in the following areas: superior cognitive ability or specific academic ability in math, reading and writing, science, and social studies. They can also have a gifted identification in creative thinking ability and visual or performing arts ability in dance, drama, music, and visual arts.
Hi, this is Kari Hake, Literacy Specialist from Tip City Schools. The next thing that we're going to spend some time looking at is what is MTSS. MTSS stands for the Multi-Tiered Systems of Supports. It is a framework that helps educators identify students' academic, behavioral, and social-emotional strengths and challenges, and to provide differentiated support for students based on these needs. MTSS in education grew out of the integration of two other intervention-based frameworks, the Response to Intervention, or RTI, and Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports, or PBIS. This visual provides your team with an excellent representation of how the MTSS model could and should operate in your school district. The outside circle gives you the flow of events that your MTSS team will move through. They will begin with evaluate, followed by identify, then analyze, plan, and implement. It is important to note that following implementation, you circle back to evaluate to ensure that the interventions that you have put into place are achieving the goals that you desire. The next circles on the interior, you will notice say academics, social emotional, behavior, and attendance. That is because these are the three bubbles in which most of our challenges fall.
Within this process, it's very important within the three components that affect a child's learning, which Kari just discussed, that we start using the terms tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And we really like this color visual because it showcases that with the green, orange, and red. So at the tier 1 instruction, we do expect all teachers, all general education teachers, to be providing the differentiation within their core instruction that is expected for all students. As you move up the MTSS process, when you're looking at the three components of learning that Kari mentioned, academics, behavior and attendance, and social and emotional needs of students, you may start to identify that students do need strategic support in 1, 2, or 3 of those areas. And we'll show you what the documentation and screeners look like for later on in the presentation. Finally, after you provide the strategic support at tier 2 in 1 or more of those components, you will document and progress monitor those supports. And if students need additional support after 6 to 8 weeks, you then look at providing more intensive support, or what we refer to in the MTSS model as tier 3 intervention.
It's important to note the size of these tiers. That our green triangle or differentiated core tier 1 instruction is much larger, meaning it should hold the vast majority of our students. The strategic support triangle is much smaller, meeting the needs of those that the tier below did not meet. And our intensive support triangle is the smallest of all, meeting the needs of our most intense students.
When many educators think of the MTSS process, we typically think about students who are struggling academically in our classrooms. However, it's important to understand, and that's why we are giving this presentation, that our gifted learners also face challenges. There are really 3 major domains where you will see challenges for gifted learners. The first is experiencing perfectionism or anxiety. This is when students feel like they're struggling to relinquish control in the classroom. They have a fear of failure, which you often see with gifted students, or they show a lack of perseverance as the task become harder. The second area where you will see challenges for gifted learners is with social emotional learning. This is when gifted learners can often struggle with peer acceptance because they may be thinking differently about an academic task. They may experience a lack of motivation if the learning activities are not challenging enough, or they may experience isolation and loneliness because they are thinking differently about something in the classroom. So these are all areas within social emotional learning to be aware of. The third challenge, the third major challenge that you see often with gifted learners is in executive functioning. So though gifted learners test gifted with their assessments and they show academic promise, you may also see within executive functioning a lack of organization, a lack of time management, or even a hyper focus on one area or one topic and an inability to move on to the next task. So once again, these are 3 major areas of challenge for gifted learners, and we'll talk more about the screeners and how to respond to these different challenges as we move on.
Once your team has identified a student that is struggling in one of the 3 major areas that Dawn referenced, or in any area, your team will need to begin the MTSS process as demonstrated in the previous visual. Some breakdown steps to help guide your team are below. Step 1 is to make sure that you provide a universal screener. This is the way in which your team will identify who those struggling students are. This is often a student self-assessment or a parent assessment. Both tools can be used with gifted learners, but it is important to remember age and appropriateness when determining which assessments your team wants to use. Step 2 involves your teacher providing observational data. This could be a general education teacher, a gifted specialist, or other personnel who interact with children who were identified on the universal screener. They will provide documentation of behaviors that they are observing and their frequency. They could look at things such as assignment completion, collaboration and peer interactions, and active or lack of active participation in classroom settings. Step 2 often leads us to step 3. When we have a demonstrated need, we will want to complete a diagnostic tool only with the students that applies to. An example of a diagnostic tool is the Frost Multidimensional Perfectionism Scale. This is a 35-question self-report measure with 4 subscales. This is just one example of a tool that your team might use in this situation. When your team is in their pre-planning stages, they need to determine what their universal screeners will be, how their teacher observation will be documented, and what diagnostic tools will be used. On the previous slide, we discussed that a universal screener is step 1 in your team determining which students need intervention and how to move forward. Below is an example of a universal screener. This universal screener in particular looks at 3 major areas: executive functioning, perfectionism, and social emotional skills. On the right, it is showing you section 1, which is the executive functioning questions. These are questions that students would answer themselves or parents would respond to. This is simply an example to help your team begin to brainstorm what universal screeners work best for your particular situation.
We are often asked to provide examples of what the teacher documentation looks like in the MTSS process. So, like Kari mentioned in the previous slide, once you give the universal screener either with the student survey or a parent survey, depending upon age level, and the student does show an area of concern, you would ask the teacher to start documenting examples of those behaviors in the classroom. And it's very important for teachers to do this each day so you can collect data in order to provide the right intervention for the gifted students. So in this form, you'll see you have areas of concern, select all that apply. You have an opportunity for the teacher to describe behaviors or incidents in the classroom, providing dates and times, reasons. That's in order to see are certain behaviors happening at the same time of day. That's also important. Or are there any other triggers to that particular behavior that we can start documenting, again, so we can provide the right intervention. Finally, you're going to look at the frequency and the duration of the behaviors, daily, weekly, on specific days. Is it on Mondays, Fridays before the weekend, etc.? So this would be part of the form. And then how long does the behavior typically last? Then we would start to see interventions or strategies attempted by the teacher that actually may have a positive effect. So teachers would start to note which interventions or strategies are working, and all of that is so important to take back to your team meetings during the MTSS process so we can continue to adapt and respond to what the student needs in order to provide the necessary support. In the next couple of slides, we're going to give you an opportunity to practice with scenarios of what could happen in the classroom with gifted learners and then how you would respond. So I'm going to read a scenario and then we're going to give you time to reflect individually or with your team in order to develop a plan. In this first scenario that is called Elliot's Puzzle, Elliot is 14 years old. He is a 9th grader, a high school freshman. He is gifted in the area of advanced problem solving and abstract reasoning, notably in math and science. So he would have specific academic ability gifted. Here is more about his background. Elliot is a bright and curious teenager who reads college-level physics books for fun and scored in the 99th percentile on standardized math assessments. Teachers describe him as insightful and quick to grasp complex ideas. He often surprises them with questions that show deep conceptual thinking well beyond his grade level. Elliot is experiencing the following struggles. Despite his intellectual strengths, Elliot's grades don't reflect his abilities. He frequently forgets to turn in assignments, sometimes ones he's already completed. His backpack is a disorganized mess, full of crumpled papers, half-done worksheets, and sticky notes with cryptic reminders like "ask her about the thing." In class, Elliot appears distracted or overwhelmed when tasks involve multiple steps or unclear directions. Group projects are especially difficult. He either dominates the group with his ideas or disengages entirely. When asked to plan a long-term project, Elliot procrastinates until the night before and then rushes through it, sometimes missing key components. His teachers express frustration, saying he's so smart, but he just doesn't apply himself. Elliot is often frustrated too. He knows he's capable, but the daily grind of organizing his task, managing his time, and staying on top of due dates feels like an invisible wall. He sometimes calls himself lazy or a mess, even though he spends hours thinking, creating, and exploring ideas on his own. Now, given all of the information we've provided with Elliot's puzzle, please spend the next 5 minutes or so reflecting either individually or with your team. Review the scenario and develop an MTSS plan for this student.
Our next scenario is about Eli. It is titled Eli's World. This scenario is about a 12-year-old boy in the 7th grade. He attends a public middle school and is enrolled in a gifted education program. Let's take a look at his background. Eli is a highly gifted student with an IQ in the range of 140. He is demonstrating exceptional abilities in mathematics, computer science. He regularly is completing high school level work independently. His teachers describe him as intellectually curious, intensely focused, and self-motivated. He often surprises adults with his vocabulary and abstract thinking. However, Eli struggles significantly with peer relationships. He has difficulty interpreting social cues, often dominating conversations with facts or correcting others, even over small mistakes. His interests, quantum physics, algorithm designs, and Norse mythology are not shared by most of his peers, which further isolates him. In a typical school day, we see Eli in his math class. He quickly finishes a complex set of equations that most students are still struggling to start. He raises his hand to point out a minor error in the teacher's example. While the teacher appreciates his precision, other students begin to roll their eyes or whisper. At lunch, Eli sits alone by choice, often reading or working on code. During group work in science, Eli becomes frustrated when his peers suggest ideas he considers illogical or inefficient. Instead of collaborating, he takes over the project, prompting complaints from the group. When they try to push back, Eli doesn't understand why they are upset. He believes he is just being accurate and efficient. Some things that Eli's teachers observe: that he rarely makes eye contact when speaking, that he prefers structured academic tasks over unstructured social time, that his attempts at peer interaction often result in conflict or withdrawal, and that he shows signs of anxiety during group projects or unstructured play. They also note his strengths, including advanced reasoning and problem-solving skills, exceptional memory and concentration, and deep knowledge in niche subjects. Please take the next few moments to review the scenario Eli's World. With your team, develop an MTSS plan for this student. If you're struggling, refer to the visual in the earlier slides. Throughout this presentation, we have given your team the structure of MTSS and ways for your team to apply that to the gifted learners that they serve. Though we spent much of the time talking about the process and resources that you might use to be more successful in the process, there are 3 overriding things that your team needs to ensure are included consistently. Number 1 is parent communication. It is imperative that parents be informed the entire way through the MTSS process. Number 2, team meetings. This is not something that a general education teacher or a gifted instructional specialist should be doing in isolation. You need to be coming together as a team. All people who have a vested interest in the student need to be a part of this team. And number 3, flexible interventions. It is key that the team be flexible and consider a variety of options, as each of the students that we serve are vastly different.
We wanted to leave you with this final thought from Linda Silverman, a licensed clinical and counseling psychologist and director of the Gifted Development Center in Denver, Colorado. She says, "Giftedness is not a guarantee of success. It is a potential for it. When we recognize giftedness in our children, it is our responsibility to nurture and cultivate it." We hope that through this presentation and learning more about how gifted learners fit into the MTSS process, you realize that we need to respond and adjust to the needs and challenges of our gifted learners, just like we do for all students. In closing, if you have any questions or would like to provide any feedback for our presentation, we encourage you to contact Dr. Lesley Hellman. We have provided her email address in the slide. Thank you so much for listening.